Today on Caught for Two, a spoiler-free quick before you buy it review for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, The Baker Street Irregulars. Why am I afraid to tell you what I think about this game? Stay tuned to find out. So today we're talking about the Baker Street Irregulars. This is the latest box of cases in the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective series, published by Space Cowboys in 2020. Technically listed from 1 to 8 players, though I think the sweet spot here is probably 2 players, 2 or 3. You can absolutely play it solo, though the challenge will be greater. And I think as soon as you get past the 3 or 4 player count, it's going to become a little hard to coordinate. It's officially listed at ages 14 and up. I think that's probably appropriate. And I think you could probably expect to get 2 to 4 hours out of each case. So that gives you the 20 to 40 hours worth of gaming out of this box. You'll only play a case once, then you will have spoiled the mystery and story, so you will not be able to replay it. However, if you're careful, you don't need to destroy any of the components, and you could pass it along to someone else. I'm going to try to address this video to 2 groups: those who aren't familiar with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, and those who are super fans but want to know where this box ranks. So if you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective system, it was designed in 1981 by Gary Grady and Suzanne Goldberg. It's a narrative mystery game. It's for readers and armchair detectives. Each of the big boxes contains a number of independent cases. In each case, here in the Space Cowboys editions, they're in individually bound booklets. You'll find an introduction setting up the mystery, and then you'll spend a couple of hours trying to solve the mystery by moving around to points on a map, then reading the associated paragraphs in the clue booklet. And when you're ready to solve the case, you'll simply turn to the end of the booklet and answer questions and be scored on how well you understand the case. There are no time limits, typically no turns, no decisions you have to make, other than where to go next to read more about the case. Most of the paragraphs have dialogues. So you go to a museum and you talk to the curator of the museum, or you go to the scene of the crime and talk to the people at the scene of the crime, or you go to the morgue and talk to the doctor who did the autopsy. They're set in Renaissance England in 1890s, and you're playing this in part for the mystery and in part to have the experience of reading and traveling back in time and space. It's a very thematic game. And those who love it not just for the mystery challenge, but for the feeling of losing yourself back in a different time and place. In addition to the map of London, which has gotten some visual upgrades over the years, but remains essentially the same, broken up into neighborhoods. In addition to that, we've got traditionally a newspaper for each case. These are the Baker Street Irregulars newspapers. They're only single-sided. And the stories in the newspaper, some will be related to your case. There's one newspaper associated with each case. Some will be related to your case. Some will be complete red herrings. Some will just be setting the thematic stage of the case. You will also have a directory. This will have locations for people by name, sort of white pages. and then a commercial entry section, sort of yellow pages, where you can look up places by office. You can go to churches, bars, hotels, lawyers, etc. Solving the mystery in these cases is sort of a combination of different elements. Some of the puzzles may be spatial. If the crime was here, then maybe you should see if the neighboring places have any witnesses that saw anything. Some of it is grunt work. You go to one place, you learn about certain people, you look up those people, and then you travel to those people. But then there's a big element of sort of, even after you've read everything, putting those dots together to understand the nature of what happened. And then occasionally you'll get to points with these games where you can't think where you would go next to figure something out, and you really have to think outside the box. How would we get information about someone? Where would be a useful location to go? But I think these are as much... calling them board games is a little bit of a stretch. There are no different roles for different players. It's just a fully cooperative, essentially solo game, but very well suited to talking out with someone else. And if you play these solo, it's much harder because you will get stuck on things that multiple people, someone will think of something that you missed or spot something in the newspaper that you missed. So what's so special about this game? This is a sort of divisive game. Some people absolutely love it. It's the highlight of all of the board games they've ever played. And some people just find it uncomfortable, not fun, and maybe have a group that can't quite get on the same wavelength. For those people like me who do love it, there are a number of reasons. One is, especially compared to modern mystery board games, this is a very boiled down to bare essentials mystery game. No turns, no time limits, no use of computer. It's all very analog. You do also have the same feeling of sort of losing yourself in a book with this game. You are essentially reading a book, but you're choosing what order to read different paragraphs in. And at the same time, it does feel, it's the illusion of being in an open world. You're choosing where to go next. Each place you go, most of them are dialogues. You'll get a very evocative description of the place you go, the library or the central cab station. So you'll get this very elegant painted picture of what you will see there. And then you have an interaction, a dialogue with a character at that scene. And you do feel like you're in a living, breathing world. It's mainly an illusion, but it does give you that feeling. And it gives you the feeling of visiting these interesting characters. Sometimes there's some humor and sadness, and we'll get to all that. And then, of course, there's the challenge of trying to solve a mystery. And these are all mysteries that aren't... We've seen a lot of modern board games, like the Exit series, Unlocked, whatever, that are more puzzly. They're sort of come down to figuring out a certain code to solve this puzzle. Here in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, there are occasionally puzzle-like things, but these are very human mysteries. They're murders where you're trying to catch the culprit, or kidnappings, etc. They feel more psychologically human mysteries, like you would see in an Agatha Christie murder mystery movie or book. So before I tell you what I think about this box, I want to give you a little bit of a broader overview of the games available in this series. So the original 1981 set was reprinted a couple times, the latest by Space Cowboys, and the title of that box is The Thames Murders and Other Cases. There are 10 cases in that box. But several other boxes have come out with about equivalent content. There's Carlton House, there's Queen's Park, there's a Jack the Ripper box, and then there's spin-off games. There's an early 1986 spin-off game called Gumshoe, which uses a similar system, also designed by the original designers, set in the 30s. There is a brand new box that mashes up Sherlock Holmes with mythos, with Cthulhu mythos, and that's Bureau of Investigations. And then there are lots of fan-made cases for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And then there are a couple of, there's at least one big expansion that has not yet been reprinted. That's Adventures by Gaslight. And then there are sort of spin-off games that aren't official, Ellery Queen, and a couple of others that if you like this kind of game, you would also like. So in the opening of this video, I teased the idea that I didn't want to tell you what I thought of this box. And that's because I've come to believe, especially with this kind of game, but with board games in general, that expectations can kill. And if I talk too highly of this game, I'm going to set up an expectation that may be hard to meet. So let me say this. To me, I think this is the best overall Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective box. If you're looking for bang for your buck, the most hours of the highest quality mysteries with the highest quality writing, it's very hard to beat this box. Now, I'm going to give you a little caveats later about why this might not be the best first box or only box. But from my standpoint, in terms of overall quality and consistency, this is the best $50 you can spend on this system. And if you haven't tried Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, this is a pretty good box to start with the one caveat I'll give you later. 2 caveats. If you're a Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective fan, then don't let me set your expectations too high, but I do think this is of the highest caliber, highest tier experience. For me, it's a 10 out of 10. But don't set your expectations too high. These are very subjective games. My favorite case is not going to be your favorite case, and my favorite box may not be your favorite box. So let's go into a little bit more detail about what's special about this box and a couple of the negatives that might give you pause about buying this as your one and only Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective box. Part of the joy of playing this genre of games is the feeling of reading a good book. And the quality of writing in this box by Dave Neale is really of the highest caliber. And there are some interesting things that are done differently in this box compared to the other boxes. The Baker Street Irregulars, which are sort of helpers of Sherlock Holmes, sort of street urchins and various lower level youngsters that are working for Sherlock Holmes in his books and do pop up in some of the other boxes and cases, here have pride of place. And you really get to know their personalities over the course of these cases. They're sort of recurring characters, and in most of the other Sherlock Holmes games, the player you play as doesn't have a real personality to speak of. Here you do. And that may appeal to you. You may find that charming, as I did, and you're like a gang of characters, so there's different ones speaking at different times with different personalities. In addition to just the very high caliber of the writing and very evocative descriptions of scenes and dialogues, there's some very deftly handled dialogue. And in the course of playing these 10 cases, there were scenes that I teared up and scenes where one of the other people I played with were actually crying and shedding tears. There were moments of real, genuine laughter and humor, and lots of experiences of being in a certain place at a certain time. And that's the people who love this game, that's what you're here for. A quick moment to talk about the sort of quantity you get in this box. So I think this is probably, you can see here are the 10 cases in this box. The first 9 are, I think, average length cases for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective series. And then the 10th case is about 3 times as long, I think, as a normal case. So for bang for the buck, for the amount of game time that you'll get out of this box, I think this is probably, this may be the highest bang for your buck in all of the boxes currently available. We have played through the entire set on YouTube about 70 hours. And that's because when we play on YouTube, it takes us probably about 2 or 3 times what it would take you to play at home. But you should expect at least 20, 30 hours of gameplay yourself. There's also a wide variety of cases in this box. There's kidnapping, robbery, murder, just small scale cases, big scale cases, lots of little side mysteries, and lots of different kinds of mysteries. I think in addition to the quantity and of a very high caliber quality in this box, you also get sort of a tour of the entire sort of range of mysteries and puzzles that have been available in this genre. So there are ciphers, there are spatial puzzles, figuring out where to go, where someone could have escaped to. There's a bunch of grunt work that's just sort of enjoyable shoe leather. First you look up this person, they mention this person. It's a wide variety of mysteries to engage your brain, so often in the same case, sometimes spread out. There's lots of great use of the newspapers, both with little side stories that are funny and fun but not related to your case, but also some very clever elements where things are hidden in the newspaper that are going to take you a little bit of time and searching to figure out and connect. There's also heavy use of a system that has been flirted with in other boxes, which is this gating system, and it's got this very nice little player aid. So each case has a set of letters that the game may instruct you to circle as you play. So you'll read a paragraph, you'll visit someone who'll say circle the letter R, and then you'll come to another paragraph and it'll say, well, if you have an R circled, then you can ask about this, otherwise you leave. And it's a way of the system making sure that you don't go to places out of order, which is something that could happen in the original Sherlock Holmes. Here it's really embraced, really used well, very satisfying. And then there are some little experimental, clever little tricks that Dave Neale does throughout this box to experiment with different kinds of mechanics. There's a game that uses a time limit mechanic, and then there's some other stuff I don't want to spoil that try to add some tension and some little twists. Talking about the quality of the mysteries, I also think this box has some of the best set of mysteries in terms of rewarding aha moments, getting to the end and feeling clever and feeling satisfied, and moments where you sit there and you're like, I don't know what to do. I know I don't understand it. I've got all these pieces of evidence. They don't quite make sense. And I think Dave Neale has really embraced one of the most enjoyable kinds of cases that you find in this genre. And that's a case where you've got these facts in front of you that seem inconsistent, that don't quite make sense. And it almost feels like it's on the tip of your tongue that you can put the pieces together and make sense of it. You're not sure if you've seen everything. Maybe there's some other place you should go, but it brings you to that brink where you think you've almost got it. You just can't quite connect the dots. And those moments are sort of the highlight of the mystery solving cognitive experience of playing these games. And I'd say that this box has more of those than any of the other full Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective boxes. Okay, let's talk about some of the negatives to this box. And I think, let me say again, if you're a fan of the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective system, this is really a no-brainer to buy and play. This is just really good, and there's no reason this won't be at the top of your Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective experiences, regardless of the negatives I'm going to talk about. Where the negatives may be more important for you to pay attention to here is if you're considering whether this is the best first box to buy, the best way introduction to the system for you. So let me talk about a couple reasons why it might not be. A main one might not sound like a big deal, but it's a pretty big deal, I think, which is this map. So here's the map from the Baker Street Irregulars box. And here's the map from the Thames Murders box. Now, you can probably agree that this looks nicer than this one that looks a little muddy. But it's not just a matter of looking nicer. These streets are all named in very small fonts. And you're going to have to look up these streets sometimes. You're going to have to find streets. Now, you will never have to completely, blindly find a street by name. But you might be given a name of a street, like an address. And you'll have to search these neighborhoods for that street address at that number. And this is a very dark map that's hard to read. And that makes it much less fun to be searching this map for stuff. Now, you can get an online version of this map that is much easier to read, and I wish that they would reprint this a little bit better. Now, the map content is identical, so that's why I say this is a question. This is one reason why this might affect your decision about whether to buy this box first or as your only box, because when I played the Baker Street Irregulars, I simply used this other map from the Thames Murders box, or one of the other boxes. So if you have multiple boxes, then it's not a problem, because you don't need to use the Baker Street Irregulars box. But if this is the only box you play, you are going to have to play on this map. Only you can decide whether that's a reason to buy multiple boxes or not start with this box. Okay, the second of two possible major reasons why you might not consider buying this box as your introduction to the system is that this box is divided into two halves. The first half are completely standalone cases of very high quality. Each one has a single newspaper associated with it and is a standalone case. You could play them in any order, though you probably will play them in the order in the box. Cases 5 through 10 are part of a loose campaign. They're mostly independent. Some of them are my favorite cases. They're great cases. But each of the cases uses the newspapers from the previous case in the campaign. So case 5 has its own newspaper. Case 6 can use the newspaper from case 5 and case 6. By the time you get to case 10, which is a triple long case, the culmination of the campaign, by the time you get to case 10, you're using newspapers from case 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. 6 newspapers. And these are very dense newspapers with lots of stuff hidden in them. And you'll be, especially by the time you get to case 10, you'll be going through these newspapers over and over and over again with a fine-tooth comb looking for tiny little details. The newspapers can be some of the more exhausting elements of these cases, especially when you feel like you're hunting for a needle in a haystack and can't find what you need. So that may be a downside for people who don't want to spend hours and hours pouring through this material for an increasingly smaller benefit. And the last case, as I said, is about 3 times as long as normal. You really will have to take good notes, keep good records, and the difficulty level is substantially higher. Now, some people are going to hear that and be like, that's what I want, that's perfect, that's amazing. If you've played the larger standalone expansions like Queen's Park or Adventures by Gaslight and love those, then you're going to love hearing that there's this super long, complicated, intricate case at the end of this box. But if you're the kind of person that says, look, I can't get my game group to play more than 2 hours, I don't want a limitless game, I want us to go for 2 hours and then make our best guesses, then I think this box may be less suitable to that than the first box in this series, the Thames murders and other cases. You might be better off then starting with that first box. And then maybe a tiny bit negative for some people, definitely a positive for others, might be the setting of the player's proxy being these young Baker Street Irregulars kind of kids. The cases are adult, but you're sort of playing as kids. And there's a little bit of, joking around and sort of acting as kids rather than the very distinguished Watson or Holmes. And it's a little bit of a different vibe there. You'll either love that or you're not going to hate it. There's not going to be fans of this system that don't like this box or the experience of playing as these Baker Street Irregulars. But if you're looking for the most dignified adult sort of protagonist, then you could maybe start with one of the earlier boxes. Okay, let's summarize. For me, this is a 10 out of 10. One of my very favorite Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective experiences. I was sad to get to the end, but the whole progression of playing the game and ending in a campaign, amazing experience. If you have never played this system, then you've got a tough decision to make whether to start with this box or start with the Thames Murders. I think you probably will have a good time. You'll have a good time either way, but you might try. There's even a print and play free demo case for this series for the Baker Street Irregulars. Just a brief taste of the game, but you might try that if you're not sure if this game is for you. If this game is for you, you've got a world of wonderful enjoyment ahead of you. And if you do turn out to love this game, there's some other games I would recommend you check out. Obviously, all of the expansions in the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective series and spin-offs, but you might try also Razorhurst, which is a big, giant, epic print and play game that is in this genre. You can get that from Board Game Geek. Gumshoe, which is the most epic of any of these games ever created, which is set in sort of a film noir, hard-boiled gumshoe detective in the 30s. That's out of print, but you can find it on eBay for $100 occasionally. That's got about 10 cases in it as well. If you're new to this whole genre and turns out you do like these detective games, you could even try some of the more board gamey modern games that have come out of this kind of game, such as Detective: A Modern Crime board game, or the really well done and tight Chronicles of Crime series, which uses an app to guide you. It's not so much for readers, but it has lots of really high quality mysteries involved. And if you really appreciate the writing of Dave Neale, who's done this box, you might check out a couple other mystery games by Dave Neale. He's done a couple of very small box of audio-focused mystery games called Echoes. There's a series of those. They're actually quite good, unique experiences and very cheap, like $10 for a small box. And Dave Neale has just announced a new mystery game focused or aimed at children called Animals of Baker Street. So set in the Sherlock Holmes world, but played by animals. It's not the same system, but it is a mystery game set in a little bit of a campaign, and it looks quite beautiful and charming. Definitely worth checking out. That should be out, I think, end of 2022, maybe early 2023. If you do play this game, I would love to hear what you thought of the different cases. You can watch our YouTube playthroughs of each case and maybe watch them after you play, see where we differed, see where we got stuck, you didn't get stuck, and vice versa. I'd love to hear from you. And I'll see you next time.